Hey, it's Starzy, and today we're talking about my top 10 reads of 2023. I read 102 books in 2023. Today we're just going to be talking about my favorites of those, the books that I really enjoyed and rated highly when I read them, but also the books that have stuck with me. There are some books that I rated fairly high when I read them, but they haven't made it to this list because I've never really thought about them again. So these are my favorites of the year, the things that I personally enjoyed the most, my personal favorites of the year. That being said, I want to get right on into this, but I just have a quick special mention to a couple of manga because this top 10 list, I've only included novels and novellas. Quick shout out, my top manga of the year, Witch Hat Atelier and Tokyo Ghoul. I'm only a couple of volumes into them each, but have really enjoyed them so far. That being said, let's get into my top 10 books of the year. Also a first for me, I have actually kind of ranked them, so I am going to be ending with my favorites of the year. So more or less, this is how I'm currently feeling about these reads in order. There is a lot of fantasy, but it is not only fantasy. At number 10, I have An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is a YA fantasy about a girl who paints a fae prince, I believe he is, and portrays emotion in the painting, which actually kind of gets her in a lot of trouble, and she gets taken away by this prince and things ensue from there. I really enjoyed listening to this story. It had that kind of fairy tale feel to it at points, but I also really appreciated this book for the fact it did take that kind of darker take on the fae, kind of realistic to the actual stories. Like there's this scene that's really stuck with me where, they go into a beautiful banquet situation, but then like the food underneath the glamour is actually like rotting, and all of that kind of imagery I really liked about this book. So I really enjoyed this, and so that's why it's made it onto here. I like some twisted fae stories. At number 9, I have Unbreakable by Mira Grant. Mira Grant, Shawnee Maguire, one of my favorite authors, so I have liked pretty much everything I have ever read from her at this point. This is no exception. This is a novella that came out that is like a darker take on magical girls and kind of the aftermath of some things that happened in the past. And obviously, like the author's writing already, I really like magical girls, but I also really like unique takes on kind of tropes and stories and things like that. So it's something that just worked really well for me personally because it had all of that wrapped up in it. My only real complaint about this was that it was too short because it was a little novella. I just wanted to know more about this world and how, what had happened to all the magical girls, because at the point we're at, like there's only like 2 surviving members of a certain group and they're all grown up and being watched by the government. And I found everything really interesting, and yeah, that's why it's here. At number 8, I have Mr. Magic by Kirsten White. This was actually the first year that Ali, Vanessa, and I intentionally kind of had a little book club going together, although Ali never finished this book, but this was one of our reads that we buddy read together essentially in 2023, and it is my favorite of all the books that we read. This is a horror. Part of the concept in this is that there was this children's show that has somehow has been kind of scrubbed from the internet. You can't really find anything solid about it, but there are all these forums about it. And so something that was really interesting about this book is that some chapters had little excerpts from forums and things like that of people talking about this, and some of the pop culture references and things that were said were really kind of funny and relatable as a 90s kid, because it was that kind of era, and so a lot of the children's shows and things that were being referenced were things I grew up with. So I really liked all of that. But this is also following particularly some of the people, the children who were in that show now reuniting as adults, and kind of realizing what was actually happening in a lot of ways. And yeah, I really liked this. As I said, I really liked those excerpts that felt quite nostalgic to me, and I know it's the kind of thing that would put people off a story. I know some people don't like pop culture references and things like that, and I feel like if they weren't things that you grew up with specifically, they might not have hit quite the way they hit for me. I enjoyed the story overall, but I also, as I said, I also really liked those little excerpts, and so this just had a good blend of things that really worked for me. This also, I think, is a very kind of personal book to the author, because of some of the themes and things that it's exploring, and there is also an author's note that kind of details that a bit more as well. But I just really liked this, and as I said, because we were like buddy reading it, I kept kind of taking screenshots of things and kept going a bit hee 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 and sharing them with my friends, which was also kind of always adds to the experience. So yeah, I really liked this one. At number 7, I have my favorite romance of the year. In fact, a monster romance, Stalked by the Kraken by Lillian Lark. I read a few monster romances earlier in the year. This was my favorite of them. This one obviously has like a kraken and then a woman who runs like this bathhouse that is like charged on intimate energy, and she is like a matchmaker, and she's a witch. I read this like a year ago, so trying to remember all the details, but I will say the start kind of bothered me a bit because like the title kind of says it all about what's happening at the start there. Like she's literally kind of being stalked. Didn't love that situation, but as soon as it kind of got past that, I really loved how the rest of the book played out. The relationship ended up being quite wholesome and supportive, and very like sex positive, and then there was also some other interesting plot stuff happening, because I am someone who, even in these types of romances, I need a decent plot and character dynamics pulling me through to really enjoy it, and there was also like interesting plot stuff still happening in this. So that was my favorite romance of the year. At number 6, I have The Honeys by Ryan Lasala, which is a YA horror, which has not left me since I read it. This involves a teenager whose sister dies, and then they return to a summer camp that the sister regularly attended to try and kind of work out more about the circumstances leading up to the sister's death and things like that. And it starts off kind of slow in a lot of ways, but then it gets really weird, and I love me a weird horror situation, and this had a whole situation with like bees, which shouldn't be unexpected from like the title and everything, but yeah, I love me a good weird horror, and this was also, you know, like queer horror, which we also love. And yeah, again, the imagery from like near the end of this book has not left my mind since I read it, and it's definitely one I want to reread because I really liked it. I think I rated it 4 stars when I read it and rated it originally, but it has not left my mind all of these months since. I think the only reason I really didn't quite give it a 5 stars was the kind of slower start, etc. But I definitely think I probably should go back and give it a 5, because it is 100% like obviously one of my favorites from the year, and it's this high up on the list, so it was a good time. At number 5, I have another horror. This is House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. I've seen a lot of people not loving this book, and I kind of understand some of the criticisms maybe, but again, this is a book that just worked so perfectly for me personally. It's got like sapphic vampiric vibes, so someone who has always loved vampires, loves sapphic stories, and you know, who just loves horror in general, especially, it's just had so much going for it that just worked for me really well. I will say, don't go into this expecting like actual vampires in the way that you might think of, but definitely still vampiric vibes, because this is following a girl who takes this position where she's essentially like feeding a rich person her blood. That's the thing that happens in this world. But yeah, things happen as she finds out more about some like girls that have disappeared before her and things like that. And yeah, I really liked this book. Obviously it's on here, it was one of my favorites of the year, but yeah, just worked so well for me. Number 4, I have The Atlas Six by Olivia Blake. Another one I've seen a lot of criticisms for. A lot of those criticisms, again, that I can't fault, but again, something that worked so well for me. I love kind of like academic vibes. I love magic, and especially stories where like you have a bunch of characters with like different powers. I love interesting group dynamics and tensions, and so all of that really worked really well for me in this story, where we have this group of people who've been selected for this secret society to look after the Alexandrian Library. I think that's what they were looking after. But yeah, just some of the tensions in this were on point. It is like a group about pretentious hot people, but sometimes that's just the vibe, you know? Sometimes that's just the vibe. I will say I was a little underwhelmed by the sequel, partly because one of my favorite things about this were some of the tensions and dynamics between certain characters that were no longer around each other in the second book. But the third one is coming out, I believe the third one's coming out this year, so we'll see how that one goes. This one definitely worked really well for me, and I loved it though. And number 3, I have a book that I don't think has even come out yet, technically. Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shauna Maguire. Did I get that title right? You tell me. This is a 2024 release, but I had an arc of it through NetGalley, and I'll just say straight up, like, I adore this series. This is from one of my favorite series. I can't even remember what book we're up to now, like 8, 9. They're novellas, they're fantasy. There's such an interesting cast of characters, you know, a lot of different representation in terms of like queerness and disability and various things that tend to pop up. And I love this series so much, and this has been one of my favorite installments in the series. This series follows children who go through doors to different worlds, and it's a lot about kind of them having to cope with coming back into our world, or some of the books follow their adventures in these worlds. And especially listening to some of the audiobooks very much feels like listening to being told a story as a child, although these are adult books with darker themes. This one I didn't listen to, I read an ebook of, but there's still like that magical whimsy to it, while, as I said, having those darker themes. And this one kind of wrapped up some characters' stories in a very kind of bittersweet way. We particularly had a continuation of Anstey's story, who was in the previous book, and this book, as the cover would suggest, also had dinosaurs. Fairly briefly, we had dinosaurs, but we still had dinosaurs. So I really loved this book a lot, and that's why it has made it to my top 3 of 2023, even though it is technically a 2024 book that I just read early. And lastly, my top 2 books of the year is really a 2-for-1 special. It is a duology, so I'm just going to talk about them together. They're inseparable in my mind because I read them right after the other, so I couldn't even tell you exactly what happened in one book versus the other. I did vlog the entire experience if you're interested in seeing some of those live reactions to reading it as well. But my favourite reads of 2023 was the Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. I did also read King of Scars, which I also did really enjoy. I didn't put it on this list mostly just so that I wasn't filling up this list with one series, but also I didn't love it as much as this duology, although Nina has my heart. But this duology is a YA fantasy series that is a heist story, but it is also so much more than that, because what really makes these books is the characters, the character dynamics, learning more about the characters, the tragedy, the heartbreak. They're very emotional. I read these like 6 months ago now, and I have not emotionally recovered. And my sibling is personally responsible because they are the one who made me read these in the first place. I have not stopped thinking about this book since I read it 6 months ago. I am so emotionally attached to these characters. I adore Nina particularly, which is why I will definitely be continuing the King of Scars. Is it a duology? Is that even what it's called? I don't know. But I'll be continuing that. I did enjoy King of Scars because Nina is my favourite. But that just means I'm all the more like emotionally broken because the ending of these books, ending with both of these books from memory, was kind of just like, how much more can we hurt Nina? But yeah, the friendships in this and the kind of found family dynamic is beautiful, and these books did make me cry, although probably not at the moment you would expect. I cried at the end of Crooked Kingdom, but it's not the first thing people would assume I cried at. I will say that. But yeah, these characters have my whole heart, and I don't even know if I can like eloquently talk about these books at this point, because still, as soon as I look at them, as soon as I think about them, all I feel is like emotionally overwhelmed. And so I don't know that I'm telling you that much about these books beyond the fact that I cannot emotionally separate myself from them anymore. And so they were my favorite because they impacted me the most, and I love the characters, and so yeah, that's it. That's it. I don't know how anything I read this year in 2024 is going to top this duology, but if you have recommendations, let me know. So that's it. Those were my top 10 reads of 2023. A lot of fantasy and horror, which are my favorites. And obviously I do also read some romance, and one snuck in here as well. Yeah, I would love to hear what your favorite read of 2023 was, or what you thought of any of these books if you've read them. And otherwise, like, give me recommendations for things that I could love this year, because I would love to have a big exciting best books of 2024 list at the end of the year. Yeah, also let me know if you'd be interested in hearing more about my like worst books and disappointing reads, because that is also definitely a list I have. I did give out a bunch of 2 stars in 2023 as well, but this is only about good things. This is all good things. These were the top reads of the year. That's it. I'm gonna go now. TT Fen and Starzy out.